The morning after my son's funeral, I found myself standing on the front porch of the house I helped him buy, the same house where I had rocked him to sleep as a child, cooked countless Sunday dinners, and prayed over him during the darkest moments of his life. My suitcases sat beside me, lined up in a pathetic row like abandoned soldiers. The cool air stung my eyes, though whether from the cold or the grief, I couldn't tell. What I could tell was that my daughter-in-law, Tanya, was enjoying every second of this. She stood in the doorway holding the house keys between two fingers, twirling them slowly as if she were trying to hypnotize a snake. Except the snake, apparently, was me. Her black dress from the funeral still clung to her frame, but the tears she had performed yesterday were gone, replaced by something sharp, clean, and venomous. Suddenly, she stepped forward, and with a slow, exaggerated motion, she inserted a new key into the lock. Click, clack, turn. She changed the locks, right in my face, on the very house my son once begged me to consider my home. I felt the breath leave my lungs. "Tanya, what are you doing?" My voice trembled, embarrassingly soft, like I was a child asking permission to come inside. She didn't bother, hiding her smirk. "Making things official," she said simply. "You're no longer family. Everything here is mine now." My mouth went dry. "Your? Tanya, this is my son's." She cut me off with a single raised hand. "Correction," she said, leaning closer. "This was your son's. He's gone now. I'm the widow. You're just leftover." Before I could respond, she reached behind the door and picked something up. For a second, I hoped, foolishly, that it might be a keepsake, a moment of shared grief, something soft or sentimental. Instead, she tossed it toward my feet. A framed photo of my son and me shattered against the porch. The glass broke into a spiderweb of shimmering lines, the shards catching the morning sunlight. David's smiling face, frozen behind a cracked screen, stared back at me. Something inside me cracked with it. "Tanya, please." The please slipped out before I could stop it. She folded her arms. "You have everything you came with, Eleanor, which is already too much. Go find somewhere else to exist." I opened my mouth, closed it again. Powerless. Stunned. My own heartbeat rang in my ears. And then, as if the universe wanted to confirm that my humiliation was timed to a script, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A voicemail. From my son's lawyer. Hands shaking, I pressed play. "Mrs. Moore," his calm voice began, "we need you here for the reading. Both you and your daughter-in-law. And yes, the sealed directive must be opened in front of witnesses. Please come as soon as possible." Tanya's eyes snapped up, her smirk faltering. "A sealed directive?" I murmured, barely above a whisper. Her laugh cut through the air like broken glass. "Go ahead. Go hear whatever scraps he left you. You'll walk out empty-handed, trust me." David knew who the real family was. I looked down at the cracked photograph, at my suitcases, at the door that used to open for me without question. In that moment, I said nothing, but inside, something steady whispered, "She has no idea what's coming." And neither did I. If you're watching this, please hit the like button because someone out there needs to hear the story, and tell me where you are watching from. It all started long before the funeral, in the little rhythms of ordinary life that you don't notice until they've been rewritten. David was my son, in the way people mean when they say the word without thinking. The boy who learned to tie his shoes in the kitchen, the young man who left for college with a suitcase full of jokes and a promise to come back for Sunday dinners. He used to call me on his lunch break just to say, "How's my favorite woman?" and would laugh when I told him I'd burned the roast. Those small, steady moments build a life together. They build trust. When David met Tanya, she seemed like the answer to a prayer I had never quite voiced. She wore perfect smiles like a costume and carried herself with the kind of confidence that made people believe in good things for him and for us. She was polite to my friends, generous with compliments, and quick to help plan holidays. At church, she sang along with the choir. At family gatherings, she laughed in exactly the right places. For a while, I breathed easy. I told myself, finally, someone who makes him happy. But looking back now, the signs were there. Subtle at first. A folded crease you might miss if you weren't looking for it. The first time I noticed, I thought I was being foolish. We'd been sorting through old albums in the living room, his baby pictures, my wedding photo, his first day of school, and Tanya reached out to straighten the frames with a little too much force. Her fingers lingered on a faded photograph of David and me, and she frowned as though offended by its very existence. "It's a bit dated," she said casually, and slid it toward the closet. The way she looked at those pictures, not with nostalgia, but with impatience, put a tiny stone in my shoe. I didn't say anything. I folded my hands and told myself, she's just trying to help make the house look clean and modern. I should have paid attention. There were other small things. The way she always asked about the utilities and then suggested, with a smile, that we could optimize certain expenses. The way she praised David for being so generous when he helped me with little money matters, and then would make a joke to his sister about how his generosity was getting expensive. "Men like to play provider," she'd say, and everyone would laugh. But later, when I found a stack of bills pushed under a drawer, unpaid and folded, the joke didn't feel funny anymore. David tried to keep the peace between us. He was the bridge, the one who took my calls and checked my thermostat, who would slip me an extra piece of cake when no one was looking. He loved us both in that stubborn, messy way that only sons know how to love their mothers. He would say things like, "Mom, it's fine. She's just stressed with the new job." Or, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." I believed him, because I wanted to. I told myself grief and stress change people. Love covers up a multitude of small offenses. Then there were the little moments of control that began to look less like quirks and more like pieces from a pattern. At dinner, she would steer conversations away from family politics and toward investments, retirement plans, house upgrades. Once, while I chatted about a garden project I'd been saving for, she interrupted with a practical comment about eligible home improvements and the tax benefits. "Of course, Eleanor," she said, "we should really think about long-term value." She smiled as she said it, the kind of smile that closed like a trap. One night, months before the cruelest morning on my porch, David mentioned quietly over dinner that he'd spoken to his lawyer about updating some documents. It was casual, a small, practical thing like changing an address, but I remember how Tanya's fork paused midair. Her eyes flicked to him, and then to me, as if she'd suddenly seen us as props in a story she'd only just begun to write. I should have asked more. I should have sat him down and said, "What did you change? Why?" Instead, I swallowed my suspicion and nodded along. "That's good, sweetheart," I said, the kind of supportive thing a mother says when she thinks the conversation is about mundane adulting. He gave a soft little smile, and the conversation moved on, but the seed had been planted. Looking back now, that evening feels like the moment the future began to tilt. There were times when Tanya's politeness slipped and the real person showed through, quick flashes only, like lightning on a cloudy day. Once she made a joke, low enough for only me to hear, about how some people cling to the past and make moving on difficult for everyone. Another time she suggested, offhand, that elderly relatives sometimes become a maintenance issue. She said it with such calm efficiency that it read like a line from a manual rather than the cruel sentiment it was. Each slip was small, but the pattern formed. A woman who valued optimization more than people, appearance more than history. I told myself I was imagining things. People grieve differently, I told myself over and over. Grief makes someone distant. Grief makes someone abrupt. I wanted to believe in goodness. I wanted to believe Tanya's sharp edges were just jagged parts of a loving person trying to adjust. After all, David loved her. He wouldn't have married someone he thought would hurt me. But there were nights I lay awake thinking about that sealed envelope David had hinted at, a passing comment. Nothing more. "I'll straighten things out," he said once, when I asked him whether everything was okay. "Just trust me, Mom." I did trust him. That trust was thick and warm, the kind you wrap yourself in when the world is cold. Looking back now, that trust was his final kindness. He knew people better than I did. He knew that some masks don't stay in place when the cameras go off. He knew that the real character of a person shows itself in the small moments, how they treat a photograph, how they talk about money, how they speak when they think no one is listening.
I just didn't see it then.
And so, with those tiniest fractures in place, the days slid forward toward a storm none of us could have predicted, a storm that would test every promise David ever made. The house that held our memories began to feel less like a harbor and more like a stage. The same rooms that had echoed with laughter would soon witness the harshest of betrayals.
I didn't know it yet.
But the day we changed the locks would not come out of nowhere. It had been building in whispers and glances, in unpaid bills and casual, cutting jokes. The pattern was there, and I had been blind to it until it was too late. Grief does strange things to people. That's what everyone told me in the days leading up to the funeral. Give her grace, they said. She just lost her husband. I repeated those words like scripture, like armor, because the alternative was admitting what I already felt in my gut. Tanya wasn't grieving. She was rearranging. The first real blow came 3 days after David died. I had woken before dawn, unable to sleep in the guest room that had once been his childhood bedroom. The house was silent, too silent, the kind of silence where every sound from inside your chest feels loud. Your heartbeat, your breath, the trembling of hands still swollen from crying. I came downstairs to make coffee, thinking maybe the warmth would stop the shaking. Tanya was already in the kitchen, sitting at the marble island, scrolling on her phone with an intensity that made me pause in the doorway. "Oh," she said, not looking up. "You're up." "I couldn't sleep," I whispered. A dismissive hum. Then, without warning, "I canceled your cards this morning." I blinked, unsure I heard her right. "My cards?" She sighed as if burdened by my confusion. "Your debit and credit cards. David covered most of your expenses these past few years, and, well, I can't afford that. Not with everything on my plate now." I swallowed hard, but I never asked him. "Oh, please," she snapped. "Let's not rewrite history, Eleanor." Her tone was so sharp, so sudden, it felt like a knife had slid between my ribs. Before I could form a response, she added, "Going forward, you should manage your own finances. I assume your pension still exists." My face warmed with humiliation. "Yes, but, Tanya, I didn't know." She waved a hand, cutting me off like she was swatting a fly. "You'll figure it out. Everyone does." It was such a small cruelty, delivered so casually, that I almost convinced myself it wasn't cruelty at all. But deep down, a warning bell rang. That bell would grow louder in the days that followed. The second blow came at the funeral rehearsal. We stood in the church, surrounded by wooden pews and soft organ music. People moved around us like ghosts, pastors, ushers, distant relatives, all preparing for the service. I was sitting alone, clutching the program with David's name on it, trying not to break down. Tanya approached me with a clipboard in hand. "Eleanor," she said, "I need you to sit in the third pew." I blinked up at her. "But the mother sits in the first row." "The widow sits in the first row," she corrected sharply. "It's tradition."
I sitter her.
"Tanya, I'm his mother." She gave a slow, patronizing smile. "And I'm his wife. I lost a husband. You lost a son. There's a difference." "A difference." She said it as easily as one might comment on the weather. I opened my mouth to protest, but a couple from David's office walked past us. Tanya plastered on a sad smile, letting tears pool in her eyes like she was auditioning for sympathy. She softly whispered to them, "It's been so hard, but I'm holding on." They hugged her. No one hugged me, and when they walked away, the tears in her eyes dried instantly. She looked at me with an expression dripping with condescension. "Try not to make this difficult," she said. "It's a delicate day." That was the moment I realized Tanya wasn't grieving. She was performing. The third blow came during the reception after the funeral. I stood by the buffet table, accepting condolences from people who remembered David as a kind, warm man. Every face made my chest ache more. He was such a good man, replayed memories I wasn't ready to revisit. Then I overheard Tanya talking to her sister behind a floral arrangement. "The house is officially mine now," she whispered. "No more extra responsibilities. Honestly, I can finally breathe." Her sister asked, "What about Eleanor? Where will she go?" Tanya laughed, a short, cruel sound that did not belong at a funeral. "That's not my problem. She'll figure it out. She always finds someone to pity her." The words punched the breath from my chest. I stepped behind a pillar, heart pounding, ashamed that I had become an obstacle in her eyes. A problem. An inconvenience to be discarded. Later, when I confronted her gently, she looked at me like I was delusional. "You misunderstood," she said. "Grief makes people sensitive. Don't take everything personally." But the tightness around her mouth, the flicker of annoyance in her eyes, I recognized them. They weren't grief. They were contempt. The fourth blow, the one that truly broke something inside me, came the morning after the service. I woke to the sound of dragging, a sharp, scraping echo down the hallway. I hurried out of the bedroom and found Tanya at the top of the stairs, dragging my largest suitcase behind her. The others were already by the front door. "What are you doing?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. "Helping you," she said brightly. "You said you'd look for a new place soon. No time like the present." My pulse quickened. "Tanya, I never said." "Oh, don't start." She rolled her eyes. "I need space. I need quiet. I need to move forward. And frankly," she took a deep breath like she was about to deliver a TED Talk. "You being here is emotionally draining." "I've just lost my son," I said, choking on the words. She shrugged. "And I've lost my husband. Except I don't weaponize my grief." Weaponize. As though my heartbreak was an attack against her. I watched, stunned and helpless, as she pushed the last suitcase down the steps with her foot. Then she walked past me, brushing my shoulder with deliberate coldness, and whispered the words that shattered whatever illusions I had left. "You were a burden when David was alive, and now you're just dead weight." My breath hitched. My knees trembled. Something inside me collapsed. That's when I realized. My hands shook. I needed to be very, very careful. Because cruelty wasn't just simmering beneath Tanya's surface anymore. It had risen to the top, unmasked,
But
ruthless. And I knew, deep in that raw, tender part of my heart, that this was only the beginning. I packed what I could, not because I was ready to leave, but because I had been given no choice. There's a certain humiliation in folding your life into suitcases, not over months of planning or in anticipation of some hopeful change, but in a single morning, under the watchful, impatient eyes of someone who wants you gone. Tanya stood in the doorway like a supervisor monitoring a worker, tapping one manicured nail against her forearm each time she thought I moved too slowly. Every object I touched became a story. The sweater David bought me last Christmas, the book of family recipes with his handwriting in the margins, the tiny porcelain bird my late husband gave me on our 25th anniversary. I held each one a second too long because it felt like letting go of the life I had known. Letting go of the woman I had been. Letting go of the home that had once been filled with laughter and Sunday dinners and the smell of David's favorite cinnamon bread. But Tanya didn't see memories. She saw clutter. By the time I zipped the last suitcase, my entire world had been reduced to 4 bags and a purse. 67 years of living, loving, losing, condensed into the trunk of my car. Outside, the morning light felt colder than usual as I carried the final load down the porch steps. Behind me, the door creaked open. "Don't forget your photo," Tanya said, her voice syrupy with false sweetness. She dropped the cracked frame, the one she'd thrown earlier, into my hands. The glass shifted, slicing the tip of my thumb. A small bead of blood formed. "A perfect metaphor," she smirked. "How fragile things can be." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I simply placed the photograph into a bag and moved toward my car. As I loaded the last suitcase into the trunk, Tanya leaned against the doorway, crossing her arms over her chest. She looked so satisfied, so perfectly put together, not a hair out of place. You would never guess she had buried her husband the day before, or that she had just thrown his grieving mother out onto the street. "Try not to make this anyone else's problem," she said. "We're all dealing with loss." I stared at her, not with anger, but with something far heavier, astonishment. How could someone be so hollow and still walk upright? How could someone claim grief, yet show none of the sorrow that gives grief its shape? She didn't look broken. She looked free. I climbed into my car. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. When I reversed down the driveway, the same driveway where David had first learned to ride his bike, I caught a glimpse of her still standing there, arms folded, watching until my car disappeared around the corner. The drive to the motel blurred into one long, aching silence. Traffic lights changed, cars passed, people walked dogs or carried groceries. The world continued as if nothing had ended. But something had. The weight of it pressed against my ribs. By the time I checked into the roadside motel, my legs felt heavy, my eyes stung, and my heart felt like it was beating underwater. The room smelled of bleach and stale air. The wallpaper peeled in the corners. The bedspread was thin and stiff, patterned with abstract shapes meant to disguise age. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally exhaled, a long, broken sound that didn't feel like a breath so much as a release of all the words I hadn't been allowed to say. The room was dim, lit only by the single lamp on the nightstand. My suitcases were lined up by the door, the same way Tanya had arranged them on the porch, neat, orderly, like items meant for disposal. Beside them, the cracked photograph lay on top of my purse. David's smiling face stared back at me from behind the broken glass. I lifted the frame, brushing my fingers over the fissures. They split his image into fragments, making him look like he existed in two worlds, the one he had lived in and the one he had left behind. "David," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Why did you leave me alone with her?" My words dissolved into the silence. I leaned back against the pillows and closed my eyes. Memories flickered. David laughing in the kitchen, David hugging me after my husband died, David reassuring me that Tanya was just stressed, she'll come around. Each memory both comforted and wounded. Losing a child is a pain no heart prepares for, but losing the home he built, the one he invited me into, that felt like being erased from the world itself. Isolation wrapped around me like a heavy coat. The motel room walls pressed in. For the first time in decades, I felt completely untethered. No husband.
No parents.
No siblings left alive. And now no son. I curled my fingers into the bedspread as a wave of despair rose inside me. "I have nothing left," I murmured. "Nothing." And then, as if summoned from somewhere deep inside my bruised chest, another voice whispered back, not aloud, but from that stubborn part of me that had survived every storm life ever hurled. "Are you sure?" The question startled me. I sat up, breath catching. It wasn't defiance, not yet. Not anger, but something sharper, thinner, cleaner. A needle of strength in a fog of despair. It was the faintest spark of suspicion. Suspicion that things weren't as final as Tanya claimed. Suspicion that David, my thoughtful, meticulous son, wouldn't have left loose ends. Suspicion that the lawyer's message, the one mentioning a sealed directive, meant something more. I stared across the motel room at my suitcases. Heavy, silent, holding nothing but the bare bones of a life interrupted. But the sharpness in my chest grew. Slowly, deliberately, because somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the humiliation and the hollow ache, something else was waking up. Not fear, not helplessness, not surrender. Something sharper, a feeling that whispered, "She thinks she's won, but this isn't over." And I didn't know it at the time, but that tiny flicker, that sliver of refusal, was the first step toward everything that would come next. It happened 2 days later, just when the walls of that motel room felt like they were shrinking inward, 1 inch at a time. I had spent the morning sitting at the small square table near the window, sipping lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup and staring at a future I couldn't quite picture. My suitcases were still untouched, stacked beside the door like quiet reminders of everything I had lost. I was contemplating calling a senior housing office when my phone rang. At first, I didn't recognize the number. It was local, but unfamiliar. For a split second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. My voice still trembled when I spoke, and I wasn't ready to sound fragile to a stranger. Then something, instinct, fate, maybe just exhaustion, made me answer. Mrs. Moore. A calm, measured voice.
Male.
Professional. Yes, I managed. This is Robert Halston, your son's attorney. I sat up straight. My heart thudded once hard, against my ribs. The motel room suddenly felt colder. We need you to come to my office, he continued, for the reading of your son's last directives. Both you and your daughter-in-law are required to be present.
Tanya.
The name made my stomach tighten. I thought everything went to her, I said softly. That's what she told me. A short pause. Mrs. Moore, I can only say this. There are documents that must be read in the presence of both parties. And there is one sealed directive that your son left specifically for you. My breath caught. A sealed directive? I repeated. Yes, he confirmed. Your son insisted that it be opened only when both you and Tanya were in the room together. And only after certain conditions were met. What conditions? I'll explain everything during the reading. But I do need you here. He hesitated, not unkindly, but with gravity. Mrs. Moore, your presence isn't optional. It is required. Required. The word hung in the air, heavy, unfamiliar. No one had required me for anything since David died. When? I whispered. Tomorrow at 2. Please arrive 15 minutes early. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. My fingers tightened around the phone until it hurt.
One more thing, he added.
It's very important that you don't discuss this with Tanya until the meeting. For your own sake. My pulse jumped. For my sake? Yes, he said simply. Your son had his reasons. And after you hear everything, I believe you'll understand. He ended the call with the professional warmth of someone who knew more than he could say. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. For the first time since the funeral, something flickered in my chest, larger now, steadier. Not hope, exactly. Anticipation. What had David done? What had he planned? What had he foreseen? I barely slept that night, and when I did, my dreams were fractured. Images of sealed envelopes, David's voice calling my name, the sound of locks clicking shut. I woke before dawn, the motel's ceiling looming above me, my pulse quick with a mixture of dread and curiosity. The next afternoon, I drove to the attorney's office, a tall brick building with mirrored windows that reflected the gray sky. Tanya's silver SUV was already parked out front. Of course. She was always early for anything involving money. I stepped out of my car and pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders. As I approached the glass doors, I saw her waiting inside the lobby. Her expression shifted the moment she spotted me, annoyance first, then thinly veiled superiority. Well, she said, tapping one heel against the marble floor, you actually showed up. This concerns me too, I replied quietly.
She scoffed.
Only because Robert is being dramatic. There's nothing in those papers that belongs to you. David knew who deserved what. The cruelty of her confidence made something inside me stiffen, not fear, but resolve. Before I could respond, the receptionist looked up. Mrs. Moore? Mrs. Moore. She addressed us both, politely but carefully. Mr. Halston is ready for you. Please follow me. As we walked down a long hallway, Tanya leaned closer, her perfume sharp and cloying. Just try not to embarrass yourself, she whispered. This meeting is just a formality. You'll leave with nothing. But then, we reached the attorney's door, and before the receptionist could even knock, the lawyer's deep voice called from inside. Send them in. We have a sealed directive that needs to be opened. Tanya froze beside me. A sealed directive. Those words didn't just echo through the hallway. They cracked something open. Her eyes flickered. Her breath hitched. Her confidence wavered. And in that tiny, trembling moment, I saw something I hadn't seen since David died.
Fear.
Not grief. Not sorrow.
Fear.
When the receptionist swung the door open and we stepped inside the quiet, wood-paneled office, I felt a strange tightening in my chest, the sense that something monumental was about to happen. Something David had orchestrated. Something Tanya hadn't anticipated. Something that would change everything. I didn't know exactly what waited in that sealed envelope. But I knew one thing for certain. This story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Mr. Halston closed the door behind us with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have in the hush of his office. The room smelled faintly of old paper and polish, the kind of scent that makes you think of careful things. Records kept, promises recorded, instructions followed. He motioned for us to sit. Tanya chose the leather chair directly opposite me as if positioning herself to receive a prize. I sat a little to the side, hands folded so they wouldn't tremble. Mrs. Moore, Mr. Halston began, folding his hands on the desk. Thank you both for coming. I know these are difficult times. Tanya gave a shallow nod, already rehearsing her face for the camera. Thank you for organizing this, she said. Her voice had that practiced edge, polite but hungry. Mr. Halston opened a leather binder and read aloud the preamble, the small, formal things that make a will follow the law. Papers shuffled. Names were called. Provisions were read. The items that belonged to Tanya, photos, furniture, the house, were detailed one after the other. Her eyes flicked to each line like a child checking off toys on a list. And then, after a moment that felt far too ordinary, he paused. There is one additional provision, he said quietly, documented 3 months prior to Mr. Moore's death. A sealed envelope and a directive specifying that the contents are to be opened only in the presence of his mother, and only in the presence of his wife. My throat tightened. Tanya's smile thinned, that same smirk of certainty slipping just enough to show the human muscle underneath. Mr. Halston reached to the side of his desk and produced a heavy, cream-colored envelope, its edges still crisp. On the front, in my son's handwriting, was my name. He handed it to me. The envelope felt heavier than its size warranted, as if weight beyond paper sat inside it. Mrs. Moore, the lawyer said gently, I will read what Mr. Moore wrote in this document. Would you like to open it yourself? My fingers hovered above the flap. For a second, I thought of stepping back, letting protocol dictate the moment. But that would be cowardice, and David had never wanted me to be cowardly. I slid the flap open. There was a single folded letter on top, and beneath it a smaller stack of documents bound with a plain rubber band. I unfolded the letter with hands that remembered every small thing my son had done for me. How he used to fold his napkin just so, how he balanced my checkbook when I forgot, how he called me in the middle of the day simply to say hello. Mom, the letter began. The very sight of his handwriting, those familiar, slanting letters, made my vision blur. If you're reading this, his voice wrote, then I'm gone. There are things I want you to know, and things I have been protecting for you. He wrote about the $40,000 I had given them for the down payment, the money I'd thought of as a gift, but which he had treated as a loan to be repaid in the only way he thought I'd accept, quietly, without fuss. He detailed in crisp clinical paragraphs how he had taken that money and invested it steadily over 5 years. Small contributions, smart choices, compounded growth, patient returns. I felt my pulse spike as I read the numbers he listed. He had included account statements, investment portfolios, and bank routing numbers in the folder below the letter. He had named specific investment accounts, included recent balances, and written instructions on how to transfer funds into my name. And if you open the investment portfolio, he had written, you'll see what that $40,000 became. It's not charity. It's accountability. It's for you. My hands trembled when I reached for the documents beneath the letter. The top sheet flashed a number that made the room tilt. $185,000. $185,000. My breath left me in a small, involuntary sound. There were entries showing consistent contributions, dividend reinvestments, dates, and signatures. Every transaction was documented, No mystery, no trick. Mr. Halston looked up from his papers, eyes kind but steady. Mr. Moore was quite meticulous, he said. He left clear instructions and documentation. He wanted to ensure his mother was provided for without reliance on anyone who might take advantage. Tanya's face, which had been so composed a moment before, began to harden. "This is impossible," she said at last. "How would he hide this? How would he—" "You mean," Mr. Halston interjected, "how would he protect the accounts so you couldn't access them?" He named his mother as the beneficiary. He also left documentation of spending patterns and correspondence I thought was relevant. He reached for the rubber-banded bundle and untied it, pulling out printed emails, screenshots, and a small stack of photographed text messages. The first screenshot was a chain between Tanya and someone named Marcus, her brother, where they laughed about getting rid of perceived obstacles. One text read plainly, "Once she's out, the house is ours. Too easy." Another screenshot showed a message from Tanya where she called me an old burden in a conversation with her sister. There were dates, timestamps, and matching receipts, luxury purchases made on days the household complained of tight funds. My vision tunneled. I couldn't feel my legs. The lawyer kept talking, his voice muffled by a rawness in my chest. He documented everything, he said. Emails, texts, bank statements. He was concerned you might be taken advantage of, and he left this to protect you. He also recorded a short memo describing why he felt this was necessary. You should know he was concerned about certain patterns of behavior. My throat tightened into a dry lump. There were more layers. An audio transcription of a voicemail, Tanya's voice laughing, then a hushed conversation where she counted out possible outcomes. There were tables of expenses showing that mortgage payments had been drafted from David's accounts, not from any alleged contributions of mine. There were even a few photographs, cards, receipts, a snapshot of Tanya pushing one of my boxes to the curb. I kept reading until the letters blurred. Each page confirmed what my gut had suspected and what my heart had hoped was not true. David had been quietly protecting me for years, preparing for the possibility that the person he'd married might reveal herself to be less than she seemed. Tanya's face had gone white. She fumbled with her clutch, fingers shaking now, the same fingers that had been steady on the porch. "This has to be a mistake," she whispered. This is fraud. He can't do this." "Yes, he can," Mr. Halston said softly. "He can. He was of sound mind when he prepared these documents. He wanted to ensure you were cared for, Mrs. Moore." Tanya's breath hitched, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw something like real fear cross her features, sharp, animal, unfocused. She leaned forward and demanded to see the bank statements. Mr. Halston obliged, spreading them on the desk like a map. The numbers were there, deposits, transfers, accrued interest. Clear, legal, final. My hands trembled as I touched the paper. The figure circled in my mind, $185,000, felt less like an abstract number and more like a rope thrown out in the dark. My throat tightened and something hot ran behind my eyes. Beneath the financial evidence was the most intimate thing of all, a final paragraph in David's letter that read as if he had looked into the future and tenderly tried to shield me from pain. "Mom," he wrote, "don't tell Tanya about this until you're safe. I know how pride works. I know how people will try to take what they want. I left these documents for you because I love you. Build a life where no one can ever make you feel unwanted again." I pressed the paper to my chest and felt the tremble of a small, fierce gratitude, so sharp it hurt. When I looked up, Tanya's composure had shattered. Her hands flew to her face. The practiced mask had fallen away, exposing the raw edges beneath, the calculations, the plans, the entitlement. She was no longer a woman of measured looks and polite cruelty. She was a frightened person with nowhere to hide. "Do you see?" Mr. Halston said quietly. "All of this is documented." Mr. Moore left specific instructions as to how his mother should be protected. "If you have any disputes, there are legal avenues," but Mr. Moore was explicit. Tanya opened her mouth, closed it, and then opened it again. There were threats there, legal terms she rattled off, but they sounded like echoes against the truth of the paper. I sat very still, clutching the envelope like an anchor. The weight of what my son had arranged surrounded me, not just money, but a plan, a map out of dependence, a way to step back into the world without the hand of someone who would call me a burden. The room seemed to breathe out with me. Outside the window, the afternoon light had shifted. It felt as if the shadows that had clung to me since the funeral were finally being drawn back. David had not left me helpless. He had left me a way forward. And in that moment, everything changed. The confrontation wasn't planned. Not by me anyway. But fate has a way of arranging scenes exactly where they need to happen. The day after the meeting at the lawyer's office, Tanya called me. Her number flashed across my phone again and again, each ring slicing through the quiet of my motel room like a blade. I ignored the first call, and the second, and the third. By the seventh call, I answered, if only to quiet the noise. Her voice was brittle, too bright, like glass stretched thin. Eleanor, she said, we need to talk. Today. Come to the house at noon. The house. The house she had thrown me out of. The house that still smelled like my son. The house she claimed was hers alone. I should have told her no. I should have hung up. But something deeper, something stronger, rose inside me. Not vengeance. Not pettiness. Just clarity. I'll be there, I replied. When I arrived, the front door was wide open, as if she wanted to prove she wasn't afraid. But fear was everywhere. It clung to the silence. It dripped from the air like humidity. It showed in how she smoothed her dress again, and again, even though not a wrinkle was visible. She'd set the dining table with her best china. The crystals, silverware, the ornate plates she only brought out for holidays. A pathetic attempt to disguise panic as hospitality. Ellie, please, she began, gesturing to a chair across from her.
Seat.
I did. Slowly. Calmly. She forced a smile, one that wavered at the edges like a paper lantern in a storm. I think yesterday was confusing, she started. We were both emotional. And things were said, documents, appeared that we weren't expecting. I raised a brow. We. She swallowed. Yes, well, you were blindsided, I'm sure. I thought maybe we could talk things through. Work something out. You and me. As family. Family. That word again. The same word she weaponized when she pushed me into the cold. What exactly do you want to work out, Tanya? I asked gently. Her shoulders stiffened. The money, she said bluntly, the illusion dissolving like sugar in hot tea. The accounts. The investments. You don't need all of that. I mean, you barely spend anything. We could share it. Invest together. Make it grow. I know financial planners. She stopped when she saw my expression. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even amused. I was simply done. With a slow, deliberate motion, I placed my purse on the table and pulled out the thick folder the lawyer had given me. The one filled with David's evidence. Her eyes widened. Eleanor, what is that? You know what it is, I replied softly.
No.
No, we don't need to do this. We don't need to stir things up. I just want to understand what your intentions are. I mean, after everything. I slid the folder across the table. It landed in front of her with a weight that seemed to echo through the entire house. The color drained from her face. Open it, I said. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the edge of the first document, the printed screenshot of her message to her sister. Once she's out, the house is ours. She flinched as though struck. No, you don't understand, she pleaded. I didn't mean. Read the next one, I said quietly. She turned the page. Another screenshot. This one between her and Marcus. She's dead weight. The moment David is gone, I'm cleaning house. Her breath hitched. David saved these, she whispered. I nodded. He documented everything. She shook her head violently.
No.
No, he wouldn't do this to me. He loved me. He saw you, I replied. Clearly.
Completely.
more clearly than you ever imagined. Tanya slammed the folder shut as if trying to cage the truth inside it. This is invasion of privacy.
Illégale surveillance.
None of this should hold up. Then challenge it, I said calmly. Go to court. Tell a judge why your husband felt the need to protect his mother from you. Explain the screenshots. Explain the spending. Explain your conversations. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Instead, she sagged back in her chair as though her bones had softened. She whispered something I almost didn't catch. I can't lose everything. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was her shallow breathing. Finally, she looked up at me, eyes red, voice a frayed thread. What do you want from me, Eleanor? She asked. An apology?
Fine.
I am sorry. I shouldn't have said the things I said. I shouldn't have rushed you out. But grief makes people act rashly. I tilted my head. Grief made you schedule spa appointments using his credit card? I asked. Grief made you plan to evict me before the funeral? Grief made you mock me to your friends? Her mouth fell open, but no explanations came. I leaned back in my chair. Tanya, I said softly, I don't want anything from you. Not an apology. Not your approval. Not even your respect. Her eyebrows drew together. Then why are you doing this? Why show me this folder? Because, I said, you need to understand something very clearly. She held her breath. You didn't break me. Her eyes widened. You tried. I continued. You humiliated me. You pushed me out of my home. You treated me like an obstacle. But you didn't break me. Tanya looked away, her jaw trembling. I rose from my seat. As for the money, I added, gathering my purse, that's not yours to worry about. That's between me and my son. And he made his wishes very clear. She swallowed. So that's it, she whispered. You're just going to walk away?
No compromise?
No discussion? Yes, I said. I'm walking away. And for once, Tanya, there's nothing you can do to stop me. When I reached the doorway, something made me turn back. She sat there in her designer dress, surrounded by expensive furniture, the carefully curated life she thought she could maintain through charm and manipulation. Now all of it looked hollow, like a set, like a stage abandoned after the show ends. Her shoulders shook. I can't lose everything, she said again, voice cracking. You're not losing everything, I replied softly. You're losing the things that never belonged to you. And that was when she broke. Not dramatically, not violently, but quietly, like something inside her simply crumpled. Her face folded into her hands. A soft, small sound escaped her lips. A realization settling in her bones. The game was over, and she had lost. The sunlight that afternoon felt different, not the harsh, accusatory light of the morning after the funeral, but softer, as if it had been filtered through something kinder. I stepped out of the house and paused on the sidewalk, feeling the warmth on the back of my hand. For years, that warmth had meant family and routine, and the safe noise of a life shared. Now it tasted like something else, possibility. I didn't feel triumphant or gloating. Instead, there was a curious, quiet clarity, as if the fog of shock had finally lifted and left me with the simple facts. I had been loved. I had been protected. I had been lied to by someone who mistook cruelty for entitlement. Beyond that, everything else would be how it would be. I had a choice about how to meet it. The lawyer's documentation simplified many things. There were forms to sign, bank accounts to transfer, meetings with financial advisors who explained, patiently and plainly, how to set up the investments so they could provide stability without giving anyone else control. We set up a separate trust, a conservatorship clause that protected my independence and prevented surprise transfers. It was all careful, adult work. A map back to safety drawn in the practical language of numbers and signatures. When the bank clerk slid the final paper across the counter and said, "You're all set, Mrs. Moore," the sound of it felt like a small bell of permission. I could breathe again in a way that didn't hurt. I reached into my purse and touched the cracked photograph David had given me, the one Tanya had shattered on the porch, and placed it gently into my wallet. I didn't put it away to forget. I put it somewhere close because memories, even broken ones, are how we remember the people who loved us. People asked me what I planned to do with the money. The practical answer was sensible. Clear the motel bills, secure a small, comfortable apartment in a neighborhood near the library where I'd once walked with David, get a sturdier car, and, yes, maybe finally renovate the little garden I'd always promised myself. But the truest answer was smaller and softer. I wanted to live without the sharp, constant sensation of being someone else's obligation. I wanted to know that I could be present without being indebted. More than money, David had left me something I hadn't realized I needed. Permission. Permission to step out of the role of needy mother and into the role of woman who had raised a son who knew her worth. He had protected me not only from financial insecurity, but from the slow erosion of dignity that happens when someone treats you like a commodity. That was the gift I understood with the most clarity. Tanya's life, for its part, rearranged itself in ways she hadn't foreseen. In the weeks after the reading, neighbors who had once complimented her on her table settings distanced themselves when they learned the truth. People can be very quick to cheer the woman who wears success on her sleeve, until that same sleeve is shown to have been stitched with lies. I didn't delight in her unraveling. Cruelty rarely repays cruelty in a way that brings peace. But there was, I admit, a quiet satisfaction in knowing I no longer shared a roof with someone who had called me dead weight. Friends called. Old neighbors dropped by with casseroles and warm smiles. More than one person said the same thing. You deserve better. Those words felt like water poured onto something that had been dry for too long. I accepted the meals and the visits, and I said what I could only say then. David knew. He always did. At night, I would sit by my little kitchen window and watch the streetlights bloom like small suns. I thought of David a lot, not with the raw, clawing grief that had followed the first week, but with a growing, steady kind of gratitude. He had known how to see people clearly. He had known how to plan for a future that might bruise the people he loved. In ways his planning had been practical, accounts, balances, legal declarations. It had also been profoundly tender. The temptation to replay the worst moments, the locked porch, the tossed photograph, the sharp laughter at the funeral, was still there. Memory is a stubborn thing. But each time those images rose, they were countered by others. The night he tutored my neighbor's son in algebra, the Sunday he stayed to make tea while I sorted laundry, the time he scraped frost off my windshield at dawn because I'd forgotten my gloves. Those memories were soft armor now, and they allowed me to accept that pain without being swallowed by it. When people asked what lesson I'd take from this, I found myself saying something simple and true. Protect yourself, even when it feels unnecessary. It's not a betrayal to plan for your future. It's not petty to insist on dignity. And most of all, trust the quiet intelligence of people who love you. My son saw what I couldn't, or perhaps what I didn't want to see. He turned foresight into a shield for me. That was love. I am telling this story because I know there are people watching who feel small or disposable, who have been told by someone they love that their presence is a burden. If that's you, listen. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a person, and you deserve protection, respect, and a future that you shape. If you've ever been through something like this, or you know someone who has, please share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Your story might be the roadmap someone else needs. And if this story touched you at all, click like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to step away from people who use you, and okay to build a life that honors the people who truly see you. David kept his word. Even from beyond the grave, he made sure I could stand on my own 2 feet. More than money, more than security, he gave me back my dignity. And that, more than anything else, is the legacy I will carry forward. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Your voice matters.